Hello, my name is Robbie Ventura, and I am your host here at the Velocity Cycling Podcast, where our one goal is to get you to fast faster. There is no one way to have great cycling performance. What works for some of us may not work for others. We really want to expose you to some of the greatest minds in sports performance, and hopefully we can try to figure out what works best for you to meet your goals and to meet your genetic potential. We're going to do one job, and we're going to try to do it the best we can, and that is get you to fast faster. Hello, everybody. I'm Robbie Ventura. I'm your host of the Velocity Podcast. We're here to get you to fast faster. I have an incredible guest today, a good friend of mine, former teammate, just an absolute, a lot funnier than people realize. You get to know Kevin Livingston. I promise you, he will have you laughing after he gets to know you just a little bit. But Kevin Livingston in the studio. He's done all 3 Grand Tours. He's been top 20 in the Tour de France, 6th in the Dauphiné Libre, but kind of cool. Being kind of the first American to ever do the Vuelta. I think he's done it twice. But beyond that, just a great guy, knows a ton about the sport of cycling, started a coaching company called Pedal Hard, very successful there, and just excited to talk to Kevin about not only his cycling career, but a little bit about the methodology and training and how it's changed over time, as well as how the coaching landscape has changed. So without any further ado, welcome, Kevin. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So Kevin, I'm sorry about that.
I had to laugh when you said I giving me some credit. I don't know if it's due on my sense of humor, but I had a funny story. I was years after retired. I was talking with Bobby Julich, and he told me that when he was in a French team, he told his teammates, he said, "Oh, you ought to talk to Kevin Livingston in the bunch. He speaks French. He's really funny guy." And Bobby said, "Yeah." These guys were like, "No way, man! That guy looks so serious in the races, and we're not going near him. He doesn't look very nice." And I told Bobby, I was like, "You know what? I'd rather have that air of being in the bunch, maybe, than." I was like, "Don't tell him to come talk to me."
It's like the mafia. Would you rather be loved or feared, right? And it's always feared is their answer. So, but there has to be some sort of translation issue with humor, right? I mean, I know you speak French, I know you speak Italian, but when you try to make jokes in Italian or French, doesn't it kind of lose something?
I think even when you're exactly, I had teammates who spoke English really well, obviously. And I remember my first season with another first year pro in the team, Dutch guy, and we roomed a lot together. And I thought he got my sense of humor. And at the Tour of Spain, which was in September, so you got to think all year long, I'd spent all this time with this rider. And he said, "Kevin, I thought you were such a jerk, man, for so long." He goes, and then I figured out you're just always joking around. And I was like, "Oh man," I felt really bad. I was like, but
yeah, they don't get sarcasm, right? Because there's so much nuance to being sarcastic that they take it literal because they know. I mean, it's hard enough to know the language, and then to get some sort of nuance of sarcasm doesn't always. I don't think that always translates.
I found the same with French, though. And once I started understanding my French teammates, sense that how they found the humor, it's pretty funny. It's good. Good to connect.
Talk about like roommates. So like you said, you've had the same roommate from the beginning of the year to the end. Why was that the culture? Why wouldn't they try to mix things up? Was it because
yeah, we mixed it up. Not the same, but if you get in a 5-day stage race and Spain or something, or Paris-Nice, and you're with the same roommate, it's a lot of time with each other. You're right on top of each other. And then, maybe not rooming with guys all the time, but at the meals, we did everything together, breakfast, dinner, in the bus together. I mean, the riders are around each other a lot.
We were roommates for a race, I think out in Oregon one time. But what do you think? I mean, never a long stage race, like a Grand Tour. Obviously, I've never done any of those, but tell me, what's the most important thing? I know we're kind of going off topic here, but what's the most important thing when you're a roommate with somebody for 20 days in a row? I mean, obviously there's a lot of stress with the race. You're not always in the best mood. What's the most important kind of thing that you want to make sure that you're doing when you were to be a good roommate to your teammates?
Just kind of keeping your in order, man. Like, keep your stuff out of, there's kind of these invisible lines, right? Like, this is my area of the room. This is your area. Just be respectful of each other. And then probably the big one is the bathroom, right? So, towels and water. And, some of the guys had some pretty less tolerance, I guess, or extreme expectations you may not know. So, who knows? Maybe they go off and tell the team lead who's making the room assignments. But no, just be respectful. I think respecting each other's space, it sounds funny, but you need that little space to yourself where, your stuff is kind of organized. So I have another funny story. When I first turned pro, I was so afraid of one of my teammates, Sean Yates. He was like known as one of the just hardest men in cycling. You can go look up videos of the guy riding, in mud and caked up, cobblestone climbs. And the guy was just known as a hard ass. And I was at a race and I was in my head, we pulled up to the hotel and I was thinking, all of a sudden it dawned on me. I was like, there's no way they're going to room me with Sean Yates. I'm thinking that would be a disaster, like this would. So I'm like, no, they're going to put me with, like my friend, George Hincapie. We're going to have fun. And it was classic Haribo. So that's like the Haribo candy. So they give you these big bags of candy from the race. And, I'm like first year pro. I'll probably eat like 3 pounds of that in one night before the race. No worries. So I go and I looking at the room list. I mean, it was like a bad movie. I'm like going down the list and I see my name, L, Livingston, whatever, 310. I go down. Who am I rooming with? Going down the names, and it's the whole team, right? So there's X's, there's 22 riders. I come down to the bottom, it's like Yates. And I'm like back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, this is a mistake. So I get in the room and he just starts messing with me like big time. He's like, and I had this bag of candy and he says, oh, my wife loves this. She loves licorice. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm like, hey, well, you can have mine and you can give it to her. And he's like, really? Are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, definitely. I don't eat candy. So he took the bag, he took it. And then in my head, I'm thinking, oh man, I just gave away all my candy, So I was still though, he left the room for his massage and he looked at me, he said, he pointed at his shoes and he said, I want my shoes cleaned. And if you knew Sean, he had this thing about his equipment, like you didn't mess with his shoes or any of his stuff, or any riders for that, I guess their shoes. And so when he was gone, I just jokingly, I took his shoes and put them in the bathroom. And when he got back, he looked at me and he said, where are my shoes? And I said, oh, they're soaking in the tub. They'll be done in it. And he looked at me and he pointed at me and said, don't you dare F with me, boyo. It was funny. And then after that, we actually went on to really he was a really strong mentor to me in my first seasons there at Motorola. I mean, he would wait for me. Some days I get dropped and he could have been going in front groups. And he had a real major influence on me, getting me through my first tour of Spain, and just an incredible guy, mentor. I know he's gone on to work, and I can see where he'd be super valuable in that role with teams, especially with connecting with the riders. He had a special way like that.
Yeah, but it's cool that sometimes when you have the king in your room, you have to at least, stand up for yourself a little bit. It sounds like you got up the courage when he was doing his massage, right? He comes in with just a towel on you. If he's exposed now, I'm going to say a joke or whatever. But anyways, that's great. That's cool. And I always thought about how difficult that would be if you're a roommate for 21 days in a row and your teammate is having a rough go of it and he needs some time alone, and how you just manage all that. But I will tell you, probably not an easy thing to manage.
Yeah, you've got to have some stories. What's your top story?
Yeah, I was always trying to have as much fun as I could with my roommates, and some of them liked it and some of them didn't want to have fun, right? I had a roommate, Scott Moniger, that was real serious, and he didn't love to have a whole bunch of fun. Probably because he was always in the yellow jersey and I was always just pack fodder. So, I didn't have I didn't need to get to bed at 9 o'clock at night. I wanted to have a little fun and watch some stuff and do whatever. But Yeah, I did it funny. We were roommates one time, and there was a bat in our hotel, and I was so excited to catch this bat, and I spent the whole night trying to catch the bat, and he was so frustrated. It was during Redlands. But anyways, I did catch the bat, which was kind of funny. And then I brought him into our room, and he was flying around and pooping all over Scott. It was pretty crazy. But put that aside here. I want to talk a little bit about the sport of cycling. I mean, Kevin, you've been around it kind of since the beginning when people were going over to Europe and experiencing Italy and Girona and different things. You've seen the sport evolve, obviously, during your career, but then you were part of Medalist Sports. You've been involved in pro racing in this country, and then coaching. How has this sport evolved from an athlete's perspective, right? Like a pro now versus a pro when you were on Motorola. What are some of the major changes you've seen, both good and bad?
Yeah, good question. I think a little bit hard for me because I think when I started working on the events with Medalist Sports, pretty soon after I stopped competing, there's kind of it just kind of rolls, right? Time just passes, and it's hard to say where there was a line of change or something changed. Some of my observations, I think, I definitely think like communication, like technology with like us right now. Hey, we're on this video, we're, talking and we feel connected. And I just remember when I first started competing as a kid and going off to, but these aren't experiences I would trade, but going to Canada or Guatemala at 17 years old and living in Denmark when I was a senior in high school. And man, it was lonely. Like I remember being in Denmark and I had nothing. I had no phone. I had no way I didn't have a calling card. I couldn't call my parents. I remember, this is the stupidest thing, but I didn't even have a watch. So like I would wake up in the night in this people's house and I'd be like, what time is it? Like, is it time for breakfast? It was bizarre, but the family was awesome. I actually lived with a rider that went on to be a professional rider as well. We were the same age. That was really cool. But I just remember it was very lonely. But again, those were experiences that I feel like obviously shaped, who I am, my life. But I look now and I think it's pretty cool that you could go live in Europe and still stay connected with some friends outside of the sport. It's not like 10 years later, all of a sudden I show back up in the US, haven't seen my grandparents. I haven't seen friends from high school. It's like this huge chunk. So I think that's a positive, like the ability to feel a little bit more connected. I know that's not really cycling related per se.
No, I think that's that's a great point. I mean, can you imagine kids today going and living somewhere with zero communication with their family, their coaches, their people? I mean, everything's gotten you can change and pivot so quickly now because of communication.
Yes. Yeah. Which probably, I talked about that a little bit, probably is an added level of stress too, right? At some point, it's like, when do you cut off all those texts coming in from people at the Tour de France, or when you've got to really shift into that high focus? I try so hard. I think it's a curse of having been an athlete is, when I tend to do things, I like to just get involved in that moment for hours or days of what I'm working on. And so it's always, I think that's tough. Like that constant sort of expectation of instant, that instant communication, I think so there's maybe a skill they're developing that I would not have if that were the case, going back.
I don't know if it's a skill, but also can you imagine the pressure that's created from that constant interaction, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all the social media and all the constant communication, the level, everybody has so much, they have such an insight into what you're doing all the time, which creates expectation. It also creates stress. It also creates distraction. So I think
sometimes things get misinterpreted, and it's like they pop on the news and they're like front page, it's like, whoa, that's not what I meant, Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, sometimes that isolation really allows you to get in touch, with who you are as a person, right? And you're not influenced by everybody else around you. And secondly, you're ultimately focused on yourself. You don't have a lot of other things to take your energy and mind and recovery away. But then again, the loneliness piece. I mean, that is that is very difficult for a lot of people to manage, is loneliness. I think it's one of the toughest things that our current culture, really has to deal with. And if they haven't learned how to deal with it like you did when you were in Denmark, when it comes at an older age, it's really something that I think is a problem. So kind of cool. That's the pros and cons. How about training? How has training and racing evolved or changed?
Observation of training, obviously just watching how more detailed, like the data, the more the teams have the coaches, instead of just having a director where no discredit to the directors, most of the directors, riders themselves, they have a very strong understanding of coaching, training, but you see teams bringing in another element of maybe a scientist or a trained, educated in school type level of sports science, and then they kind of combine that with the real sort of world. I don't know what you call that, like a former rider, right? It's all they're drawing from different areas and putting it all together. Whereas, like, we would have a lot of the riders would go out and just find their own coaches, right? The teams would have coaches, but they didn't necessarily expect that they were going to coach every rider in the team. You had access to doing testing and things like that, but guys really wanted to have that trust. And I guess that's similar, to athletes that I work with. They want to work with you and have you really reviewing their stuff. But yeah, definitely we started training with power, kind of mid or, late 90s. I feel like we were some of the first riders on the power meters. We didn't really know took a while to figure out what was going on, what that all meant. And just seems like now they're really dialed in. It's hard, you got to keep an open mind and try to learn and everything, but also there's, a little bit of the way I learned and my experiences are going to highly influence my coaching, right? So my coaching is I'm a big believer in, I love the data. I fortunately, my first coach started me on heart rate training. I read books, on lactate threshold training with heart rate and stuff back in the late 80s. So that's a part of my training and coaching. But then there was an element where I really had to, not that the guys don't today, but, I still had to really rely on sometimes like, hey, I'm not feeling right, even though my heart rate's right, and sure enough, 2 days later you have a cold or something. And so.
Yeah, for me, I see it as, there's this component of allowing the data to help you understand kind of where you're at, to create reference points of your current fitness level, to make sure that, you're adding the right amount of stress. But, the philosophy and the thoughts and the ideas around training are the same when we were kids as they are now, right? You have to stress your body more than you're comfortable, and then you have to allow it to rest. And I think what I fear is happening in the world of sport right now is data is becoming the only thing that people look at. And we're not paying as close enough attention to actually how we're feeling. I mean, we have these Oura rings that are telling us how we're recovering. We have all these power meters that are telling how powerful we are, but there's this inner compass that needs to be honed as with experience, right? The reason why you're a great coach is because you understand all the data, but you also understand the value and the experience that comes with just riding and training a lot and understanding how your body behaves. Because the interesting thing about training in my book is we all behave differently. We all respond differently. There's a lot of things that work for some people and not for others. And a big part of that, along with the data, is really how you're feeling. And I think one of the challenges and one of the things that I've seen with athletes that I've worked with and watched is how people feel mentally, how excited and happy they are doing different things plays a big role to how long and how well they're going to be down the road. Short term, we can handle anything. But long term, which really matters in life, sometimes the work that we're doing is more than we can handle mentally over time, and other things start to fall apart. Maybe our threshold's going up, but we're not happy. We're overdone. Our work is kind of falling apart. So I think that mental aspect of enjoying the process gets lost sometimes when you're so data focused.
Yes. Yep. Those are great points. I agree. I think the mental sort of awareness, right, of what's going on. And also, just like in your training, looking at the data, like you just said, like predicting mental stress, fatigue accumulation, or how it's going to accumulate. That's I love that. Because I'm my career, anytime if I get some younger athletes and they're willing to got some questions, I'll just, as much as I can, I'll share with them. My son has a lacrosse tryout for a club team this weekend, and he's really nervous. And I was like, oh, here's my opportunity. And right before he was going to bed one night, I said, hey, you know, you can practice lacrosse tonight for 10 minutes. And he said, wait, what do you mean? I said, you can lie in bed and just picture yourself making saves on some big players. They call it what does he call it? It's peppered with balls. You know, he's a goalie. So they just rip these balls at him. And he knows he's going to go against some big shooters, right? Some guys that are recruited Division I already out of high school. And I told him, I said, man, you've been up against guys like this before. Just picture yourself having an awesome tryout and just making big saves and big clears. He's like, yeah. He's like, that's a good idea. You know, and I'm like, yes. Because I do. Yeah. That mental, it's just so important. And yeah, you can, what happens with the data is your coach is laying it on thick, and you don't realize the amount of energy it's taking to like get through these workouts and like suffer. And, you know, let's face it, you know, cycling is a sport for people that like to suffer, you know. So I guess most fitness, you know, enthusiasts that search out, whether it's CrossFit or running, or, you know, there's a certain element there that pain equals, it makes you feel good, right? There's some endorphins and things coming from that. So you got to be careful. And I always thought when I raced, my mental, this is going to sound funny, but I would sometimes be in the tour and think that I tricked people, that the only reason I was there is because I was just mentally, I was mentally stronger. Like physically, I wasn't talented enough to be there. Like I somehow found a little loophole to get in there. And you know, you get dropped on a day and you're like, man, I've kind of been exposed, you know. Like I used to get frustrated when I felt like my body wouldn't follow my mind. Like it wouldn't cooperate. It was like, Kevin, this is all your little motors got, man. You're done for the day. That used to make me so mad, so frustrated. So I really prided myself throughout my career on like mental preparation, mental toughness, and just being really positive, trying to be as positive as possible.
Yeah, if I could say like one, like just general thought, and this is probably because, you know, I'm kind of from an older era, is, you know, mentally, I think the athletes, you know, maybe a few kind of, not decades, yeah, maybe decades back, just had a different mental attitude. They were kind of like, put on your suspenders and go to work and get this done, right? And I think that's easier to do when you have less distractions and you have less tech and you have less stuff, right? Nowadays, I think there's a lot more mental stress and strain with all of the technology, all of the stuff that they have to look at, right? They're looking at their power meters constantly. They got a microphone in their ear. They're being told to do a certain output. They have all this training and preparation. They have recovery metrics. And with all of that, right, I think the athletes today have a lot more to think about, right? So they just can't, it's gotten more complicated. I mean, back in the day, it was pretty simple, right? You're going to go do this, you're going to go knock that out, and it's going to be done. Either you're going to can or you can't. And now with all these choices and options and things to think about, I think it's a little tougher nowadays to almost be mentally tough than it was with the simpler kind of life back in the day. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if all that extra data helps them to make less mistakes because of it. And I think it probably does, right? I think
that's a good point. I kind of wonder if the level is just amazing. Like these guys are just, and the guys are all dialed in and just sharp, and it's impressive. So I think there's definitely there's been an uptick in level, and to maybe what would have been, you know, to mix the generations, let's say, or I think that they can say, like on a day, maybe I was like, oh, I need recovery today. Well, maybe I could have handled a little more stress that session, and taken a recovery the next day. And maybe I would have got a better response and kind of been like more where they're getting now with their training, you know?
Yep.
because I think it's what I really liked the last years. This I just popped in my head when you said we're talking is also they've kind of grown up with this, the younger guys, right? The guys in their 20s. And so they're maybe more adapted without knowing, right? They don't have to take on something new. This is kind of what they're used to, but that's still a stress, right?
Yep.
But I think it's cool that younger guys are just coming on the scene, and there's no, it's cool to have the old school respect of the older riders and everything, but these guys have they're 19 years old and they're winning these huge races. And think about all the, that rider, and this, I don't know anything about him. I just follow him in the media, and I think he's an awesome rider. That Belgian, the Remco Evenepoel, sorry, I'm butchering his name. That guy's just a phenom, and he crashed. It was crazy, like that's so scary. He went off a bridge, and fortunately he had a major injury, but he ended up being okay. But he's following Nibali, who is a seasoned pro, and think of the number of descents that Nibali has done in his career. The guy's an awesome descender. He's known for his skill. Yep. So Evenepoel's kind of at a disadvantage, right? He's 10 years behind in sort of gathering that kind of experience of descending, but he's already there. He's in the front group. And I'm not saying that's why he crashed. That's not. Right. I'm just saying, I'm showing you the difference in level that he was there. Yeah. And he's 19 and then he comes back so quick. And I think it's awesome seeing the younger guys just come in. They have that's pretty mentally tough in my opinion. They're like, I don't care who's been here, who's been the guard. Like, I'm here to win races. And I think that's made the road cycling pretty exciting.
Oh, to me, road cycling today is incredible, and it's because of the depth, right? I mean, back in the day when you were around, there was 10 or 15 guys who were going to kind of animate the race, and there was going to be 80 guys that were going to help those 10 or 15 guys animate the race. Now you have 80 guys that can animate the race and 20 guys that are going to help those 80 guys, and it's made everything more stressful because when there's that many people that are that good, there's only so many spaces on the podium, right? There's only so many spaces in that.
So many spaces on the road, right? On the road.
It's just gotten to a level, and the speeds they're going, the power that they're putting out, the force, everything is just multiplied. And obviously
power climbing, the climbing times are getting faster, and
it's really, really impressive.
We can't go into everything, but also just the technology. I mean, when I think back, like some of the bikes I rode and the weight of the bikes, and it's it's wild.
The speed of the wheels, the aerodynamics, everything's integrated.
My current road bike is old. I've had it a couple of years, and it's like way better than any bike I ever raced on. People are like, hey, when are you getting a new bike? I'm like, I don't need a new bike, man. That thing weighs like 16 pounds. What am I going to do?
Yeah, for sure. How is nutrition changed? I know, Kevin, in terms of you personally, I've known you when you were a professional on Saturn, Postal Service, Cofidis, telecom. You were obviously very lean, tall and lean, but you had some muscle on you. And then afterwards, you started playing hockey, got a little bit bigger. We did a couple races in Florida together, and you were probably over 200 pounds. Talk about that. You've kind of gone up and down in weight probably 2 or 3 times since you were a professional. I don't think that's uncommon, but I think you figured out why.
Yes, I think so. Just been like anything in life, just a journey. And I think it's funny. When I look back, the first few years that I'd stopped racing, I was still in pretty good shape, and it's just funny, the mentality. All the cyclists know that the weight is just this bizarre thing in the sport of cycling. And because power to weight is so important, and, I probably only weighed about 15 pounds heavier for several years. But when I would go work at these events like Medalist, and I was lifting weights and I was staying in great shape, I felt great. But everyone that saw me was like, oh my God, you're so big. You're so fat now. You've gotten so big. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and that kind of, you're thinking, did I really? They're like, I feel great. I always joke with my wife, I'm like, I have the opposite problem. I look in the mirror and I'm like, yeah, I look good. You know what I mean? This looks good. So I guess that was a good thing. But then I think, as life, we had children and my kids and life stress, we all have it, and no excuse, but just the years start ticking by, and I'm coaching and trying to support my family, and just there's more important things than me being able to go out and ride 4 hours a day. And kind of woke up one day in my early 40s and I was like, man, I'm just out of shape. Like I'm just not an athlete anymore. What happened to me, And so I think it was like a tipping point. I was just kind of fed up. And so I just at that time, I must have been searching some things on the web, like fasting or dieting or how to lose weight or something. And because of course that's how my old psyche thinks, right? Fitness is just, you go right to that obsessed, that OCD thinking of weight. So came across some like channels on fasting and different doctors and people sharing, so much incredible resources you can find. And I just started following a program, and I was real motivated, and just started bringing me back to some things we used to do when I raced, and just started kind of having fun with it, experimenting more so than, putting the hammer down and being miserable. And even in that, I feel the last 3 years, I feel like I've been really vested in like trying to lead I call it a fasting lifestyle, or a low eating frequency lifestyle. That's just been my approach. It's not saying it's the only way to do it for your health, or the only way to go. But I've found some success with it. I've done some Ironmans or half Ironmans, and kind of dabbled with going really low down again to feel really strong. And but I just kind of use it to manage my health, and I feel great. So I look back, I'm like, oh man, if I just had a little bit more knowledge racing. And I think that's another thing these guys have, is they're just more in tune with the nutritionists and things. And not to say we didn't have nutritionists, but our team would be just like, show up. Like, you didn't show up to the Tour de France overweight. You know what I mean? Like, you showed up, whether you didn't eat for 2 days or I don't know, whatever it took to get there, but you didn't really know what we were doing. We were just like dieting,
Yep.
And so I feel like I could use that knowledge, and it wouldn't take what it's taking me now. Like if a pro rider applied like 10% of like some fasting, I'm sure they would just it would just dial them in and so quickly. And you hear the teams, do some of this fasted training or fasted workouts and things like that. So,
yep.
Yeah, I love the topic, but cut me off.
No, I think one of the interesting things that we talked about yesterday was, as a professional cyclist, you become so efficient at utilization of fuel, right? You become hyper sensitive to fuel, because your body becomes more and more and more efficient at burning fuel. So you can have less fuel and last longer on it, right? Your aerobic capacity increases. You're able to, preserve glycogen, and all these things are adaptations your body makes when you ride 5 to 7 hours a day, day after day after day.
Yes.
So when you stop doing that, your body's still super efficient, right? And unfortunately, if you eat normally, right, like a normal person eats, those 2,700 calories a day will last you 3 days, where for a person like myself who's inefficient, it only lasts me 3/4 of a day. So naturally, I think cyclists have a challenging time. Professional cyclists who are very, very extreme in their training and their adaptations have a little bit more difficult time keeping their weight down for a while.
Yes, I think you see that in athletes across the board. So when I get training people, I always kind of warn them. I'm like, yeah, you're going to be probably uptick in your hunger, and you're going to rev your metabolism. You may be able to eat a little bit more for a while, but as you make the training adaptations, you might find you just don't need as many. Like you're saying, you have to be a little more precise with your calories to if you're interested in a certain weight, right? A certain race weight. And you see that, people get training for a marathon, and it's the first time in their life, or a long endurance cycling event, that they've ever just trained to do something really long. And then they build some of that, maybe it's a more efficiency with their fat metabolism versus glycogen, and then all of a sudden you're like putting on weight even though you're riding, so it can almost like backfire on you if you're not aware of what you're doing, because you do want to become, like, to your point, you want to be, I guess if the word's efficient, that's part of that level of fitness. So there's sort of a trade-off there, right? It's a trade-off, and I'm not blaming that on, but I definitely, I from my own experience with everything, I joke, I feel like if I don't do anything, I don't burn anything. Like my body is so just low burning, just efficient. And that's, again, for me, yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, when people come in and say, "Hey, I want to lose a bunch of weight, I'm going to start riding a ton," and they're true, because they're going to burn a lot more calories, right? But they're also going to get a lot hungrier, right? So when you finish a bike ride, you eat, and if you've ridden for an hour and a half and you've burned 700 calories and you eat 700 calories, it's a level. But the problem they don't understand is their body keeps requiring less.
Yes.
So carbohydrate, and you eat the carbohydrate, it turns to fat eventually. So I think one of the challenges and one of the things that I tell people right away is you need to maintain strength training. That keeps the engine firing, right? That keeps that metabolic rate going up versus down.
And the muscles revs them up a little bit, that movement.
Yeah.
Because there's studies, right, that show that like endurance exercise, you have a quick fall, like you're burning your high metabolism during the workout, high demand. And then when you're done, it just kind of falls off pretty quickly. Like if we do a cycling workout today, it's not like the whole day the metabolism is kind of stressed or up. But to your point about strength training, the breakdown of the muscles has a higher demand to recover and to be anabolic, to build. So that you're right. I think lifting, that's something I'm dabbling in now. I've reintroduced lifting for the first time in 20 years into my training, just personally for fun and for fitness. And I'm noticing a difference even after like 6 workouts. So
yeah, for sure. So we have a resting metabolic rate machine in our lab, and we have both endurance athletes and we have strength training athletes that take that resting metabolic rate test. And what we've seen firsthand is when you take a person to a resting metabolic rate and you give them lots of aerobic stress over lots of duration, their resting metabolic rate goes down. Mm-hmm. If you do lots of strength training, the resting metabolic rate goes up. It requires more calories, right? Because exactly what you said, the furnace and the muscle building requires inefficiencies metabolically, whereas aerobic training creates efficiencies metabolically.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, that's a great.
And I think these kids today, though, they understand this. I mean, like when I was a young cyclist, I didn't do a lot of strength training, right? I just did a lot of aerobic work. I was naturally good on the strength side, so I figured I didn't need to do it. And I always was one of those guys that was always overweight, and I couldn't always. I probably ate too much, really, at the end of the day, and didn't train enough. But at the end of the day, I think it's an important note for our listeners is to understand that doing a lot of aerobic training is going to reduce your metabolic rate a little bit. So,
and to that too, like I think that you have to be aware of also your age, right? So, I definitely have had some different experiences here, even in my 40s, and even now after approaching 50. It's kind of fun as a coach because you start to feel like you're having continued experiences like you did when you're a professional athlete that you can share with your athletes, So,
yeah,
and I love I love the kind of, you hear people say this, you just can't out train your nutrition, right? You can't out exercise a bad approach to your diet. So
for sure,
you got to address it. And I think, starting in your late 30s, early 40s, it becomes a big reality.
So the last question here, we're going to talk a little bit about coaching. You've been coaching cyclists, triathletes, and even non-endurance athletes, soccer players and whatnot for a while now. How have you seen the coaching landscape change? What has been some of the key things that you've had to evolve to kind of keep up with this ever-changing market, and where do you kind of see it going over these next 10 years?
Again, that's tough. That because I'm doing things now that I see, like I started on spreadsheets, and going back to the start of our conversation about getting overwhelmed and all this stuff. Another one of my philosophies is like the basics. Like I'm a big believer, like you got to start with the basics and have those foundations no matter what, no matter how great technology is. And like, if you don't have like the right bike fit, we'll just talk cycling, right? If you don't have the right bike fit, you don't have the right shoes, the cleats set up, you haven't been sort of instructed or really learned how to approach, how to sit on your bike and turn the pedals over. Like those are the basics, right? You've got to develop the neuro skill, like how to pedal and start putting in the time in the saddle. And so I think, again, over the years, it's probably just happened naturally with time. And I haven't noticed that, I went from spreadsheets to, or writing my training out to people on paper and faxing it to them, to spreadsheets, thought that was big. And then using a system like Training Peaks, and then people started uploading their data to there. And then the workout started becoming, instead of just me laying it out for you what you're going to do, now I got to build these blocks, and it's like this exact, oh my gosh, I missed a second at 200 watts, that just blew everything. My workout's over. And so again, I'm limited. I'm going to be limited with my abilities based on my experiences and how I've come along. I try to keep an open mind and keep up with, like I said, studying the fasting or the stuff on ketones and ketosis and carbohydrates. So trying to keep up with all of it, but didn't really answer your question. That's just where that's where I feel.
No, I think that's good. I think, sometimes people try to just glom onto the latest and greatest technologies or things that are going out there. And I caution coaches to do that. I think understanding what and kind of what has worked for the athletes that you've worked with, what has worked with you, and then really keeping things as simple as possible. And I think oftentimes people get excited and they want to make things more complicated than they need to be. And keeping things simple, I think, is something that we're getting away from to some degree. We're also kind of losing some of the fun and the excitement of experimentation. I think people get so locked into a schedule and a program and a workout that they lose the ability to give themselves some flexibility. Every single day they do a workout, right? I mean, one cool thing about Velocity and our workouts is, we have an on-demand library that you can choose from and have a bunch of different coaches to be motivated by. I still think being excited and motivated to do a workout and the power is a part of it, but really the learning and becoming a good bike rider, like you said, the basics, learning how to pedal, learning how to shift, those are things that are getting missed because they want to do 2 minutes at 200% and then a half a minute at one. I mean, it's just the skill component, the learning component, which is motivating for me. It's like I need to keep learning and building my skill set. And I feel like sometimes we get so wrapped up in power output that gets missed nowadays.
You just said that's some great stuff. And that you just made me think of something that we were talking about, like the newer generation or what's new and what's changed. So it's almost like a caution, like warning to maybe you're an age group athlete or you're coming into cycling a little bit older, let's say in your mid 20s even. We all know, like when you're a kid and you learn a skill, like you learn it quick, and the brain, there's something happening there where it's such a deep learning and it's such a strong connection to the motor skill or the brain connection required. So to the point of these young riders being able to descend at 18, 19 years old and have these, they're grasping those skills so quickly. But like when you go later in life, like, you and I joke a lot, like people probably may not know how incredible of a hockey player you were. And I started playing hockey. I mean, I was in jeans and a Giro helmet at the local ice skating rink, 40 years old, holding on to the boards with hockey skates on. And no one else was there that knew me, and I felt I was ridiculous, but I wanted to be Robbie Ventura,
Oh God, please no.
And, through a lot of air, a lot of falling, over the next like 4 years, I stick to the basics on the skates because I'm learning a skill like that at 40 years old. Same a little bit for me with swimming, but when you're younger, you grasp that stuff so quick. So if you're older, especially age group coming into something, you've got to focus on the basics. And another famous saying I like to say to people, I'm like, single leg takedown. And they're like, what does that mean? I wrestled in high school or grade school and a little bit in high school. And I just mastered the single leg takedown. I could take down most any guy with a single leg. That's one move. I had guys on my team that would do these fancy throws and they would try to catch you and show off and do something really fancy. But you get the basics down, your balance and how to properly execute and catch that hole. And same with sport. If you want to be eventually kind of an elite at your level, what you feel like your goals are, you do have to really put a lot of time into the basics.
Blocking, I say blocking and tackling. Like,
okay,
you can throw a perfect spiral over the tight end with a crossing pattern. What wins games is blocking and tackling.
Yes, yeah. Like we never see that in those.
Yeah. Blocking, we always highlight the Sports Center play. The guy caught on his fingertips, but how about the guy that's sitting there every single day beating his man with a good block, right? So I think,
or how about the rider in the group that is drinking his doing their hydration, doing their nutrition. It's a long race, but someone else is looking at the power meter. Oh, I think I can do this. And then all of a sudden at the end of the race, here comes the guy that was, see you later. Legs are done. So yeah, the basics are big. It's a big.
And back to kind of like, some of these elements as it relates to training, I think, when we think about what's successful across all the athletes, it's skill development, right? Some people might need more threshold work or VO2 max work or whatever because of their energy systems. But I think the cool thing about our ideas and philosophies, especially here at Velocity, and why you're such a great coach for Velocity, is because skill and technique is really what's missing when you buy a plan off the internet or you go to like a trainer road and put it in there. I think ultimately the things that are the most important to keeping people safe as well as getting people faster outside is the power is important. Don't get me wrong. Nutrition, your weight, all that stuff's important. But teaching people how to maintain steady state cadence over varying terrain, or teaching people the importance of that little nuance of up and over when you're doing that, like you were teaching in your class with climbing, and the importance of being able to control power in a very small window so you don't detonate when you are climbing and you're max out. In teaching that stuff, you can write it all you want, but having it come from you, a person who's been in those positions a lot of times, really gives the credibility to the workout. But it teaches something that doing a workout that is in a training plan just doesn't give you. And that is, to me, what excites me about what we're doing here. We're blending the basics with the new power, and we're teaching those skills that I think bring people to a higher level. And honestly, it's a heck of a lot more fun. Hearing your story about when you gave them the gas a little bit during the picture day, I mean, that is also what's missing in workouts is the fun. And hopefully, you experienced a little bit of that during your Velocity classes.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity. I really be great to get, people on this platform and interacting and just evolve and be like you said, a fun yet very covering all the bases, right? The technical and the data, and being covering that while having fun. Because you suffer so much. You got to figure out a way to, like I always joke, kind of amuse myself. Maybe it's not amusing to other people when I tell some of those stories, but
no, they're great. No, and I also think it's really important. What you bring to the platform too is you don't always have to be on your limit to grow, right? I mean, I think something easier, more controlled efforts around tempo and lactic threshold, or even below that for a man, as long as you're working on a skill. And we did some really high cadence work with you. Yeah. And I will tell you, maybe I didn't feel it from a power perspective, but some of those super high cadence intervals were just as challenging mentally and physically than some of the high intensity work that some of the other coaches do. So I think that balance is really important. It's really a lot more fun to do an easier ride when I'm learning or when I'm working on a skill in the process.
Yes. And as you know, like there's some missed parts of what you're seeing, how the professionals are getting really to where they are. You might only see the fun, or not, I won't say fun, or the harder workouts, but they'll if you can get them alone or talk to them about their training, what you would find is that they're not just training that day. They've got an overall look and they've got confidence, and you got to trust your training and have confidence in it. Not always try to be like, well, I'm just going to do a little more just to make sure, because those systems don't develop if you don't spend time in them. And I think you would back me up in that when you look at the traditional zone breakdown of training, what doesn't really get talked about a lot or coached is that you've got to be so strong in zone 1 to, we'll call it zone 3, underneath your threshold. Yeah. But to do that, it just takes so much time. You've got to just put in the time. And that's not really like glamorous, cool training to talk about. Oh, what'd you do today? I did 5 hours in zone 2, changing up my cadence. Be like, really? You didn't do any threshold or VO2 max? Or so yeah, just being I always tell my athletes, like, you'll impress me more if you follow the plan and you have discipline to the plan. I already know you're, tough and like to suffer. That's why you signed up with me. I already know that. I have that respect for you. So I like seeing that discipline of the plan, and also realizing that you're just not training every day. It's not just that workout. You've got the next weeks laid out in front of you. So it's got to all fit together.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kevin, so much for this time. I know you got all kinds of stuff. I think you're getting ready to do another velocity class, which we're super excited about. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Velocity Podcast, where we're here to get you to fast faster. I appreciate lots of other podcasts in our library, but if you get a chance, check them out. Hopefully, you'll come and join one of Kevin's classes on the Velocity platform at vqvelocity.com. So long, and thank you.